back in order. So,
It's 4 o'clock meeting at the site, I'm sorry.
yeah. So Maxine's going to give us a status update. Maxine, are you ready for that?
Yes, sir. Maxine Maxted, DOE. So all nuclear material facilities are in sustained operations. H Canyon has processed 3 batches of the high flux isotope reactor or HYFER fuel in FY18. Material test reactor or MTR fuel processing was initiated in the 6-1D dissolver in June with 1 batch completed. July was spent moving solutions forward in the separations activities of H Canyon, for example, first cycle, second cycle, and high activity waste. This will free up tank space to allow more dissolutions of fuel in the next months. Processing of HYFER fuel will continue in August. The target residue material, or the Canadian liquid, processing campaign continues. In K area, all 6 destructive examinations, or DEs, required in FY18 have been completed. Downblending of plutonium was initiated in March. 10 3013 containers have been downblended this fiscal year. K operations are focused on supporting the 1 metric ton removal of plutonium from the state of South Carolina. LRA continues to support fuel receipts from foreign and domestic research reactors and prepares for transfers of spent nuclear fuel to H Canyon for processing in FY18. 235F continues to work removal of materials at risk and address actions for completion of the implementation plan for the DNFSB recommendation 2012-1, and that's the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. SRNL, the laboratory, is making progress in moving out of the safety pause, with all work groups expected to exit the pause by mid-August. Safety is an issue that DOE takes very seriously, and that includes SRNL. This focus on safety has consistently made SRNL one of the safest national laboratories in the complex. Through this safety pause, SRNL has renewed its commitment to safety and is placing greater emphasis on pre-job reviews and increasing management presence in field activities. As a result of this approach, there has been little impact to date on SRNL missions. With a deliberate and measured resumption of paused work, efforts are in progress to mitigate any potential shifts in deliverables, and no long-term impacts are anticipated. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxine. I was going to do the same thing. So, are there any questions? Mr. Hilton.
Charles Hilton, Cab. Would you restate that about the downblending and the 1 ton leaving?
So, what we've done so far to date, they've done 10 downblend cans, or 10 3013s. We actually put all of that downblending operation on pause so that they can focus on the 1 metric ton removal. And that's about all I can say on that. That's an NNSA activity. I'm sorry.
Just out of curiosity, maybe you can, the 10 canisters.
The 3013 containers that have plutonium, yes, sir.
How much is that? Is that 100 pounds, a ton?
I know that the 10 cans gave us about a little over 9 kilograms of plutonium oxide.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Dave Isley, Cab. Maxine, what was the original commitment from DOE on the 3013 surveillances? Was that some number, or for some number of years?
It's so it goes on until we have addressed all of the materials at issue. So there's not really a number. There is a number we have to do each year to maintain a 99.95% confidence level that we are going to identify. I'm trying to remember all the percentages. Identify the worst case scenario that we will have surveyed and opened the worst case scenario cans. So that gives us 99.95% confidence. So right now we're at 6 a year. If we were to decrease and take a year off from DEs, we'll have to increase that number.
So the real question is, when can we stop doing that?
Can't stop doing that until I've downblended and removed the material that's a question. So that is our top priority, is those cans will be the ones that we target to get out of the site the fastest.
And how many 3013s is that?
It depends on which number. It's about 450.
Okay, so 10 a year. We're going to be doing those surveillances for a while, is what you're saying.
We are, but hopefully when we get up to speed doing downblends as a normal activity, not just in our spare times, we'll be able to cut that time down, reduce that timing.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Larry, this is Gil.
Hey, Gil, you have a question for Maxine?
I'm still stuck in the office, but Maxine, I've heard some rumbling that H Canyon is going to ramp up a little bit more production. We're running things through the line. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
So that is our goal. Right now, we're doing what we call limited processing based on our budget scenarios. We can do like 5 dissolution batches per year. We do, as long as we get the funding that we request in 19, we will increase our staffing levels and try to increase our batches. So we have a plan in our system plan that we've showed you guys of how we're going to increase those dissolution batches over the years. So that is our goal.
That answers your question, Gil?
It does. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, Maxine. Okay, I guess we'll move on into discussion on 235F presentation that we had recently. Does anybody have any comments or questions on this presentation that Randy did for us? Charles?
Charles Hilton, Cab. Again, I'm trying to understand the process that we go through. When 235 was shut down in the 90s, whenever it was, from the presentation, it appears that they went home from work one day about 5 o'clock, and the next day it went basically into cold standby. Is that kind of close?
That's pretty close.
Under whoever's guidelines that controls this,
It was in the 80s.
When one goes into cold standby, we don't maintain the facility, we don't oil the manipulators so they can be used again. We don't do it, we just close the door and lock it. Is that the procedure?
That's what was done for that. That's what was done for that facility. That facility had no future or enduring mission. When it went away, there was no need for it. And like I said, I can't speak to the decisions or why they made them the way they did, but they almost literally turned out the lights and left. Now there's been some ongoing surveillance and maintenance activities that have gone on since then to kind of keep an eye on things, make sure the contamination is not spreading and things like that. But other than just making sure that everything is performing its safety function and keeping everything contained, it's just sat there.
This may not be a fair question to you, but under the processes today, when we shut down something out there and it goes to cold standby, do we still do the same thing? We just walk off from it, or at least do we try to maintain it? The thing that concerns me, they said all these manipulator arms, they don't work. You can't use them anymore because they're corroded. They never work, oiled, or whatever you do to them.
That's what we're assuming.
And I'm kind of just thinking, not knowing the procedures, if they had all that stuff still working, it would be a whole lot easier to clean that mess up.
If they'd have deactivated the facility when they were done with it back in the 80s, it would have been a whole lot easier to do for a whole host of reasons. The regulations were different, the rules were different, the environment was everything was different then.
Well, I understand that. I'm just trying to see.
And they had, and
mistakes
everything
made
worked.
there are not made in the future.
No, today, if we were if we had a facility that had no mission, we would run it. We would deactivate the facility. We'd flush the systems. We'd decon what we could, and we put it in a layup state. And if it truly had no other mission, at some point it would go to D&D, and they would do what they do, make it go away, entomb it, whatever they would have to do for the facility.
Thank you.
Maxine?
Sorry, Maxine said. The other thing is you would have that deactivated state documented in a formal document that they could get out of our document control system when they came back in the future to go do it. So they would know the status of everything in the facility when it went to that deactivated state.
Well, the question is simply, obviously we made mistakes when we did this in the 90s. Just make sure there's something in place that we don't create a similar problem today as we shut down facilities.
Understand.
Okay, anyone else have questions? I have one, Randy, or a couple of things. We're training a team now, and I think you're about ready to let this team do their work for the cleanup of the glove boxes and so forth over there. And I'm just wondering, first question is, when this team finishes there, being as trained as they are, could they go to other parts of the site and do other cleanup work? And will we maintain a team that specializes, and that's all they do, you know, for their entire job?
The answer to the first part of that is yes. In fact, they've been doing that over the past couple of years with budgets and other issues that have been going on. We didn't get to removing the MAR as quickly. Well, we got there as quick as we got there as quick as we could. And these guys have been doing work, and if you remember the picture, on the west side is the side of the cell line that is least contaminated, and they've been doing a little bit of work over there, practicing and doing some other stuff. We had to do some remediation on a couple of windows that were cracked. At some point in the past, somebody had actually drilled a hole in one of the windows and run a wire through it, so we had to take that off and seal that all up. Yeah, you would wonder why they do that in a glove box. But anyway, so while there wasn't, if there wasn't something actually happening that required their skill set, then they have gone off to FH Laboratory, because there's some hot cells there, and they've done some work there that needed to be done in their hot cells. They've done some work at SRNL in the hot cells and highly contaminated facilities up there that needed done. So they've been doing some of that already. Now, the last part of your question, would they maintain a crew like that? I guess I don't know the answer to that, because it would depend on if there's what the work might be. If there was work out there for them to move to, then they would move to that. A lot of these guys, most all of them, came from the TRU work. We had all the work going on to segregate the TRU and get it all shipped to WIP. A lot of these guys were involved in the segregation and repackaging of that, which is where they developed where they got a lot of the training, developed a lot of their expertise with handling plutonium and just bad stuff. I mean, they had to watch out for sharps and all kinds of stuff when they were going through the drums and sorting that stuff out. I don't know if that answers your question completely.
It does, and the other part of the question is in the F area, what other buildings, what other facilities in the F area are going to need to be cleaned up, or is 235F the heart of F area? And if it's
No, the 800-pound gorilla in the room in F area is the canyon.
So will the canyon need to be cleaned up? And
yes, I believe the thought is that when they deal with the canyon or 235, they want to deal with the entirety of F area and close the area. So when what I'm currently doing, which is to execute the plan that we put in place to respond to the board's recommendation, that will reduce the MAR in puff. That's a small part of the building. I think I've told you guys, a third-ish, something like that. It may not be quite that much. There's a little bit of MAR, very little compared to puff, in a couple other places. And to get to a full deactivated state, there'd be a little more that may need to be done. So there may be a little more that needs to be done in 235F. I don't know. That'll really depend on starting to have conversations with the state and seeing where all that goes. But there's the FH laboratory. They're currently in a process. They've just started on a plan that they built to take, I call them beam them back to the mothership, but to take the laboratory functions and the analytical stuff that goes on there and move those functions back up to SRNL, along with the people that are doing the work, so that we can proceed with deactivating FH laboratory. So when FH laboratory, when that movement is done and 235F is done, 235F should be done mid-20 as far as the work. Then there's about a year of paperwork to tuck it all in and put it to bed. I don't know exactly what the time frame is for the consolidation of the functions back up to SRNL, but I think it's like 21-ish, something like that. So when that happens, conceivably somebody could start to look at what's it going to take to do the closure of F area, because the canyon's been laid up some time ago. There may be some. It's just like I keep saying with 235F. When we get to the point of we're going to close the area, there will need to be discussions about, is there anything left to do in the canyon? What will we need to do with the lab? What will we need to do with 235? But once the functions have moved out of the laboratory and I've completed this piece of 235F that I'm working on, I personally don't see any reason why you couldn't begin the thought and the discussion of, okay, now what's it going to take to close F area? And I don't know off the top of the head of what our ongoing S&M costs are, but it's not a trivial amount of money.
So the budget's going to drive the whole thing, just like everything else out there?
Probably. I mean, I don't know the business of the closure folks, but you know, there's a formal process that we'd have to go through once the operating facilities and the groups get it to a deactivated state. Then we need to transition it over to the D&D guys, and then they need to start the negotiations and figure out what everybody can agree needs to be done with it.
Thank you, Randy.
Sure.
Anybody else? Doug?
Doug Howard, Cap. Randy, on page 8 of your slide, the residual material in the 9 puff cells was last measured in 2006. Is there any need to measure it again, or is that it's only a one-time measurement done?
No, it's been measured a few times over the years. The 2006 is the latest that we had when we embarked on this. But one of the first things we did is get the lab queued up to start taking a new set of measurements using newer equipment, and they've been proceeding with those measurements. They just completed it. The last piece that they needed to do was the wing cabinets on cells 1 and 2, and there's a draft report of their results that's out. The final should be out pretty soon, and then that will complete a new round of measurements. And that'll be important because the way the measurements were done in 06 and the equipment they used, it introduced error into it just because of the sensitivity of the equipment. The fact that, for example, they were shooting through, when they'd shoot from the shift operating base, if you remember from that picture, through the window into the cell, they were shooting through about 2 inches of glass and about 8 inches of water. So there's a lot of shielding there that would interfere with their measurements. When we went back this time, in addition to having newer equipment that can take more precise and more accurate and precise measurements, we removed the outer window, we removed all the water shielding, so these measurements were only taken through about 1.25 inches of glass. So we expect a much more accurate and precise number coming out of this. And it should be a little less than what was done before. The actual number that they come out with may not be substantially less, but when you take into account the error associated with it is much smaller, it'll end up being a smaller number that we have to deal with.
Thank you.
Sure.
Narendra?
Excuse me, Narendra Malik, Cab. Is there any curie limit when you do the final closure?
No. When we talked about it, putting the plan together, I mean, I think I've explained that putting the plan together was even kind of shot in the dark because you physically couldn't see in the cells because the windows were clouded, and it was our best guess from talking to folks what might be in there, how bad it might be. We had the older numbers from the older assays. We thought that we could get, better, more accurate numbers, but we also don't know the kind of success we're going to have when we go in there and decon it. We're going to rip out. We're going to remove the equipment, a lot of the equipment that we think may have a lot of holdup in it. I think I told you at one point that this material was ball milled. Well, in the process of doing that, you would think reasonably that the ball mill might have a lot of PU-238 left in it. So that's one of the pieces of equipment we're going to go in and get out of there. But we don't know, for example, if we go in, because this is all going to be done remotely through the gloves and with tools, if we go in and try to wipe down the walls, how successful that'll be. We don't currently have plans on using any kind of abrasive chemical decon agents. We're just going to go in and use we have a specially designed vacuum for use in there that the lab built for us. So we'll go in and haul the big chunks out, sweep up the smaller chunks, vacuum it, and wipe it down, and then take another set of measurements and see where we're at.
Well, I have a follow-up question. If there is no curie limit on that, so why don't you go and grout it as it is?
We believe that we need to make a reasonable effort to remove the mar that can be reasonably removed. So that's why we're not going to use abrasive chemical agents or any kind of abrasive plastic or anything. We're going to go in and take a reasonable approach to removing what can be removed and clean it up as best we can, and then see where we're at and go from there. The answer may be, when we've done as much as we think is reasonably possible, that then we have to have the discussion about, okay, how much is acceptable to leave there, and what do we have to do to satisfactorily immobilize it?
One follow-up question, sir, excuse me, this. If we are going to remove the contaminated equipment or other material, then we're generating more waste for disposal. So then we need to find another facility where we can send it, ship it for disposal.
WIP.
So why don't we just do it here?
Like
To me, it will be more economical.
It may be, but I think we have an obligation. We have an obligation when we go in, and it kind of gets back to your question. Although we weren't the ones that turned off the switch and left, if we're going to deactivate a facility, we need to make a credible and reasonable effort to remove as much contaminants and things from it as possible before we turn it over for deactivation. I mean, I understand your question, but I think there's a reasonable amount of activity that could be removed.
And Maxine said, Dewey, I agree with everything Randy said. The other piece that you have to factor in is you have to do performance assessments on whatever you're leaving behind, and you have to show that whatever you leave behind is not going to impact the environment for like 10,000 years. So that's the other reason why you have to do that.
Follow-up question with that. Since it will be it will be grouted, the radiation won't be leaving the facility.
I understand. We still have to assume after 10,000 years that the grout has decayed and become a rubble, and that rainwater gets in, and you could have releases to the environment, and we have to keep those below certain levels. It's all in accordance with our DOE orders.
Thank you.
Doug?
Doug Howard, Cap. Got one more question. This may be a question that you may not be able to answer, but the decon teams that you use to do the decontamination, are those part of your team? Are they part of your?
You mean the group that we've assembled to work on 235F?
Right.
Yes. Originally, some of those workers, because of the way the TRU work was done when they were doing the segregation, some of them were subcontract employees of SRS, but I believe there may be one, but I believe all of them over the past few years have become full-time SRS employees.
Okay, and the reason why I asked that, I asked the question is I come from a military background, and in the military, we practice and we have decontamination teams that are there for that purpose in case of, them having to do what they're supposed to be doing. Would it be possible, or could it be possible where military guys could get some training in doing that, or is that a question you can't answer?
It's a question I can't answer, but I do know that we have done, to say exercises, but we have some of the military's teams come in and they've actually trained in F Canyon as a part of their ongoing training regimen. So I know we do work with the military for opportunities to do training and things that would be useful for them at the site to help them out with it helps them out with their training needs, because it's kind of a unique facility because they can go in with their instruments and equipment and see real numbers.
Thank you.
Sure.
Charles?
A follow-up to your statement, Charles Hilton Cab. You said F Canyon is kind of the gorilla out there. When was it
In F
shut
area.
down?
Gosh,
Well, let me rephrase
a
that.
while ago.
Let me rephrase it. Did they go home at 5 o'clock and cut the lights off?
No, they didn't. In fact, they went through an extensive flushing of the facilities, the piping, the lines, to clean it out as best they could before they basically called it deactivated and parked it.
So we did a better job there than we did at 235F.
Yeah, I understand it was a 3-year activity, just flushing, cleaning, and laying it up.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? Thank you, Randy. Maxine, appreciate the information. Okay, we move on to public comment. Have any members of the public would like to comment on anything that's been said? That's all I have, James.
All right. Well, no other topics that you folks need to discuss today?
No, I guess the only recommendation we've got is the exchange, and
Right.
we've proposed that, we voted on it, and we certainly haven't gotten an answer back. It's
Not
only been a
quite
couple
yet,
of weeks.
no.
Yeah. So that's where we are with that.
I believe there was one comment on the phone.
Yes, comment on the phone.
Larry, it's Susan, can you hear me?
Yes, Susan.
I'm sorry, I signed in a couple minutes late. I can't drive right now. I have eye surgery, so I'm is there any report on the leaks from one of the tanks?
You're breaking up a little bit. You're wanting a report on the leak in one of the tanks?
That would be a liquid waste question.
Was there a report given on that?
No, that would be on the next committee, in the Waste Management Committee,
Okay, so that'll be in the next committee?
if they have it in their update to talk about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the phone from the public? I guess if that's it, we can adjourn.